Good morning. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. Thank you guys for coming. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Susan Dockery. I'm the nurse mentor of the Urban House here in the skilled section of Scotia Village. Urban House is our memory care unit, if you're not familiar with it. I have been a registered nurse for 11 years. I've been at Scotia about the past 5.5, and I have been in my role here in the Urban House for about the past 2 years. When one of the independent residents came and asked me to give a little talk about dementia, I was kind of like, oh gosh, it's such a big subject. There are so many different things that could be covered. So we sat down and I said, what would be some of the most valuable information to give? There's a lot of things about dementia, some I'm familiar with, master of none, right? So I might not have your answers today, but I can try to find them out if you have questions. So that's where we got our kind of objectives for today. So hopefully we're going to be looking at what is dementia and Alzheimer's, looking at normal aging versus dementia, the stages of Alzheimer's, so kind of the progression of the disease. And then we're going to flow into the second half with some tips for communication for those with dementia, some things that we can do to create joy with them, have moments of joy versus frustration, and looking at some of the challenging behaviors that come with dementia and how we can think about that or possibly even help with some of those. So there are 2 handouts in the back. If you didn't get one, they're on the right side of that table. One of the handouts on one side has an umbrella that's kind of similar to this screen here. So most people, when we say dementia, they think in their mind, right, equals Alzheimer's disease, equals memory loss. That's not exactly correct. So dementia is actually an umbrella term for a set of symptoms. Dementia is the memory loss, the trouble, the deficits with thinking, with language, with judgment. There are many different diseases that cause dementia, and one of those is Alzheimer's disease. So dementia is the big term that describes the symptoms that someone is having, but the actual disease is Alzheimer's. There are dozens of other diseases as well that can cause dementia. The estimates kind of vary, but Alzheimer's disease is, they say, anywhere between 50% and 2/3 of dementia are caused by Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease, in the brain, there are clumps of dead and dying nerve cells and proteins that form what are called plaques and tangles in the brain. You may have heard that phrase associated with Alzheimer's, plaques and tangles. And they're kind of exactly what they sound like. They get in the brain and they gunk it up, and they keep the oxygen and blood from being able to flow effectively to the brain. Those plaques and tangles can only 100% be diagnosed after death in autopsy. It's not something we can see while the person is alive. So actually, you cannot get a 100% Alzheimer's diagnosis until someone has passed away. Other types of dementia are vascular. This is the second most common cause. So with vascular dementia, it's a blood supply to the brain issue. Sometimes someone has had a stroke, maybe arterial disease, something else that prevents the good blood supply from getting to the brain. Lewy body dementia is often compared very similar with Parkinson's dementia. The estimates again vary, but up to 75% of folks who have Parkinson's disease will also eventually develop dementia from that disease. Frontotemporal dementia is another kind that affects our frontal lobe right here. This is usually diagnosed at a younger age. It progresses a little quicker, and it causes major changes in personality just because of the area of the brain that affects that frontal lobe. It's useful if we know what type of dementia someone has, if someone's diagnosed with dementia, because each of these diseases that causes dementia is going to kind of have a set of unique symptoms and a unique progression. For example, Alzheimer's disease, when someone has Alzheimer's, you usually see a steady decline in their abilities over the years. With vascular dementia, they may go along for years at the same level, and then boom, suddenly after years they have a dramatic decline. With Lewy body and Parkinson's disease, one thing that we see that you don't in the other dementias is hallucinations. So they'll say, you see that little girl in the corner over there? There's a little dog under that chair. That's very typical of Lewy body and Parkinson's dementia. Unfortunately, it would be nice if we always knew what type of dementia someone had, so we knew what to expect about the progression, especially if you're the caregiver or a loved one, right? It gives you an idea of what to expect and therefore what to plan for. However, a lot of times we don't, especially the folks that I see, if they're at an older and a more advanced age when they get the symptoms of dementia, maybe they go to the doctor, didn't do so well on the memory test, and the doctor starts them on Aricept. And that's the end of it. Or if they're lucky, maybe they get a referral to a neurologist. But a specific diagnosis requires a very thorough workup, including scans, blood tests, memory tests. It takes a lot of time in the office. Aside from the medical professionals not being great about ordering those workups, the other trouble you run into is folks in early dementia sometimes, they're scared. They know something's wrong. They don't want to go to the doctor. They don't want to get that workup. They'll actively avoid going to the doctor or participating in those tests. All right. While all these types of dementia are going to have their unique symptoms and paths that they may follow, there are also some things that are true about all dementias. Probably the most well-known thing, we know that it's going to affect the memory in some way. The second thing that's true about all true dementias is they're progressive, so they get worse over time. I sometimes think about it like riding a roller coaster down a hill. So you may have good days, times when you're on an upswing and the person seems more lucid. You may have downturns where they're having a really bad day. But over time, that roller coaster is going in one direction and it's down. All dementias are progressive. Along those same lines, the other thing about all true dementias is that they're all terminal. Because dementias can last for years, some of them 10, 20 plus years that a person can live with dementia, a lot of times people will pass away from another medical condition in the meantime. However, if that's not the case, dementia itself will ultimately be fatal. Here we have a scan. It's kind of like, I don't know if you guys had it, but we always had it in the science fair. They'd show you, this is a healthy lung, this is the lung of a smoker. And the lung of the smoker is all shriveled and gray because it's been deprived of oxygen, right? There's a similar thing going on in dementia, where you have a healthy brain versus a brain with Alzheimer's. We can see here there's several differences. This brain with Alzheimer's, it's physically smaller. The brain can actually shrink by up to about a third. You can see these gaps here, big spaces in the brain, where pieces of the brain are actually deteriorated. Atrophied is a word that they use a lot. You might see that on scans. It means that the brain has literally wasted away. And the coloration, you could see just like that lung that's deprived of oxygen, the brain with dementia is not getting a good oxygen supply. What happens with our organs when they don't get a good oxygen supply? They die and they waste away. And that's what's happening with the brain. You can see the yellow discoloration versus the pinker color of the healthy brain. I think it's useful to see this picture because sometimes we think about dementia is just memory loss, but it's more than just that. Teepa Snow, who's one of the experts on dementia, and on the, not the handout that has the picture of the umbrella, but the other handout, on one side of it, there are some resources, and one of the resources I put on there is Teepa Snow. You can go to her website, but you can also just plug her into YouTube and watch her videos come up, and they're all wonderful. But she wants us to call dementia brain failure. And I think that's a really good way to help us picture what is going on in the mind. Because if we tell someone that we have heart failure or liver failure, they understand that that organ is no longer working, right? And there are symptoms that happen to the person because that organ is no longer working. It's the same thing with the brain. Dementia is brain failure. The organ is no longer functioning. It's wasting away. Okay. We know that the biggest risk factor for developing dementia is aging, okay? Up to 50% of those over the age of 85 will have some symptoms. So it's important to understand what's normal aging versus what's dementia. What signs should I see that I would want to be concerned about? With normal aging, there can be slower recall, so it takes a little longer to access that long-term memory. You may hear or say things like, oh, hold on, I got to think about that. That has to come to me. But they still make those connections. You may have a little bit more trouble concentrating, especially if there's background noise. So I can't focus on what you're saying with that TV in the background, or there's too much noise in here, I just can't focus. But they don't lose the ability to overall comprehend what is being said to them or form a sentence and be able to form a reply, hold a conversation. The capacity to learn stays intact, even though it may take a little longer to absorb new information. So if you got a new iPad, it takes you a while to learn how to use it, right? Versus my 15-year-old son, who I think was born knowing how to use it. But overall, in normal aging, people still have the ability to hear new information and retain it. With dementia, however, folks lose the ability not only to retain new information or short-term memories, but they lose the ability to do things that they have always done. This is usually, you'll hear family members a lot describe things that are like, all of a sudden, mom was doing something that was totally uncharacteristic of her. She always knew how to do this. So mom was a great cook. She always brought the green bean casserole to Thanksgiving. But this year when she showed up, the green beans were still frozen. Like, all of a sudden she couldn't follow this recipe that she knew by heart. Things like that are really off. They have difficulty finding routine words or actually comprehending what is being said to them. So again, normal aging, it's harder for me to focus, right? I need to cut out the background noise. But with dementia, they are losing the ability to understand what is being said and to find the words to make a reply. A lot of times, some of the first signs are trouble with finances. If dad always handled the finances, and now there's big mistakes being made. And I don't mean like, oh, I made a math error when I balanced my checkbook yesterday. It's dad forgot how to write out a check. It's we couldn't figure out the bill at the restaurant, so we just laid down $200, and it was a $10 bill. Getting lost, going somewhere routine. This is another big one that sometimes is kind of that red flag that family members or loved ones first notice. Mom went to the Piggly Wiggly every day for 20 years, but today she got lost on the way coming home. That's a big red flag. And then losing the ability, again, to retain new information or make new memories. So when you start to have a conversation with this person, you start to hear the same question come up 3, 4, 5 times in a 5-minute span, right? That's a cause for concern. Okay. So while each dementia can have its own unique timeline for progression and symptoms that it goes with, what we're going to look at here today, this is a specific model for Alzheimer's disease. Though all dementias, as they are progressive, you will see very similar things, very similar symptoms that the person will have. There's lots of different models about the progression of dementia there are some that divide it up into 7 stages. This Alzheimer's model divides it into 3, first, middle, and late presentations. So the early stages of Alzheimer's, this is usually from the first notable decline to receiving the diagnosis, is about 2 to 4 years. This is a scary time for the person because during this stage, they still realize something is wrong. They might be scared. Again, they might be actively avoiding going to the doctor or refusing because they're scared to hear that diagnosis. We're all scared of dementia. Their spouse or caregivers may also be scared. They may be scared to hear that diagnosis because they realize what it means. They may be scared to tell the person, should I tell them that they have Alzheimer's? Should I tell them that they have dementia? But this is where you start to see that memory loss and forgetfulness. Some of the things we talked about in the last slide, getting lost, going somewhere routine. not being able to get the words out, things like that. You may see personality changes. One of the things that can be affected in the brain is the areas that control personality and that actually control empathy. So you can not only see a change in personality, but you can see a loss of empathy for the caregiver, and that can be really, really hard. A lack of judgment. This can be safety awareness, so they might turn on the stove and walk away. It could be trouble with money. They can become very easily overwhelmed. You might see a decline in grooming. Sometimes people handle this stage in different ways. Some people get really angry. You might see someone, maybe if I'm standing here, I'm trying to come up with the word that I want to say. Miss Milligan's trying to be a really nice friend to me, and she gives me the word. And I say, I know that. You shouldn't have said that. Because they get defensive because they understand something's wrong. Or maybe I say, oh my gosh, I can't remember this. Why can't I remember this? And again, she's trying to be really nice to me. She says, it's okay. I say, it's not okay. How could you think that it's okay? These are natural reactions to these first stages of dementia. It can be really hard on a caregiver because it seems like no matter what I say, I'm wrong. But understand that it is a symptom of the disease of what they're going through, and it's about the different parts of the brain that are affected. In the second or middle presentation of Alzheimer's, which can be anywhere from 2 to 10 years, this is when the person, they no longer realize that anything's wrong. There's some blessings that come with dementia, there's some curses. I don't know if this is a blessing or a curse. They no longer have to live with feeling like they have dementia or that something is wrong. On the other hand, they can no longer be left alone. They don't have any safety awareness. They need supervision 24/7. This is the stage during which a lot of caregivers or family members might need to seek outside help with caregiving for your loved one. And just a side note, if you are a caregiver for a loved one, our obligation to those with dementia is to do the kindest, most loving thing. And if you are not able to give them the care that they need at home, sometimes the kindest, most loving thing is to let someone else caregive for them. So just know that you're meeting your obligation if that's the case. But this is where they have difficulty following conversations and organizing their thoughts. They may refuse to change clothes and bathe. And they may get aggressive with the people who are trying to make them do those things. They start sleeping more. They may start to have incontinence, forget people's names, even maybe not recognize family members. And again, we may see those difficult behaviors, aggressive behaviors, wandering, restlessness, spitting, hitting. Sometimes you hear inappropriate language, cursing, sometimes racial slurs, or sometimes you'll get racy or flirtatious comments, inappropriate comments. This can be really hard on the caregivers and the family that knew the person before because they say, Mom would have never, right? She would just die if she could see this right now. It's easier on those of us as caregivers who didn't know the person before. But for families and loved ones, this is really hard. And what I can tell you is it's the disease, it's not the person. Just like if I have liver failure, right, you're not going to look at me and say, quit turning yellow, okay? Stop being difficult, stop turning yellow. It's a symptom of my disease. Just like with dementia, which we said is brain failure, there are symptoms that go along with it. And one of the things, some of those symptoms can be really difficult to hear. It can be curse words from the little church lady who never cursed before. It can be those racy comments to someone that's not your wife. It can be difficult behaviors and hitting. And it's just about which parts of the brain have been affected, which parts of the brain have died, and which parts are preserved. And unfortunately, some of those parts that are usually preserved longer is the center where we know bad words, and it's our fight or flight. So if we get in a tough situation, it's still in our brain that we can lash out and be aggressive. The developmental level in this presentation is about of a 2 to 5-year-old. And you can see that if you think about some of the things that a 2 to 5-year-old can do. The favorite word, right? No. I can promise you during this stage, a lot of times if you ask someone, hey, do you want to go take a bath? No. Do you want to change your clothes? No. It becomes a favorite word again. The other things, they want to wear the same clothes multiple days in a row, right? They want to wear 3 shirts. Maybe they want to take off all their clothes. Those are all symptoms of the disease. It is the part of the process that they are in. In the end presentation of Alzheimer's, which can last 1 to 3 years, this is where we see a global decline in all the functions of the person. So again, it's not just memory loss, it's brain failure. Our brain controls our physical bodies as well as our memory and our personality and all those things. So we see declines in all those areas. They're going to be incontinent. They lose the ability to walk, and it's not because their leg muscles are atrophied. It has to do with the brain and the centers of the brain that control motor coordination being affected. They can no longer recognize even family members. They have a loss of self-identity at this point. They usually, at the end, can't even form a sentence. So you may have a loss of speech altogether. Sometimes you'll have 1 or 2 words that are just on repeat, or a phrase that's just on repeat. Or maybe you'll have a nonsense word or nonsense sounds that are just on repeat. They spend a lot of time sleeping. They can't participate in even simple activities. And the developmental level in this stage is at that of an infant. So again, just to give you a picture, if you think about what an infant is doing, that's back at the stages that their brain has regressed to. I heard one time that the first memories and skills that we get as people with dementia are the last to leave. So again, it's kind of that return to the infantile state. Okay, so we've talked hopefully a little bit about what dementia and Alzheimer's is, and on that handout again, on one side there's an umbrella that talks about dementia. On the other side, there's a little layout of those 3 stages of Alzheimer's. We're going to switch gears just a little bit, but first we're going to have a little memory test. Who's ready? Okay. All right, the first part's going to be really easy. I'm going to go really easy on you this part. So it's a test. We're going to see who can think the fastest. Does everybody have something to write on, just a scratch piece of paper and a pen? It doesn't have to be anything special. If you need one, raise your hand. Yeah, Amy and Greg are bringing them around. Here's a pen. Alan's bringing around some pens.
These are our pens, so you gotta give them back. Remember. Write down in Miss Sandra. Teacher pen. Don't go.
All right, when I say go, I want you to write down all the months of the year, okay? And when you're finished, the first person to finish, when you're finished, raise your hand. I'm going to be timing you, okay? Oh, sorry. Yeah, you can abbreviate. Ready? Ready, go. The months of the year. Okay, people are finishing up. I think the fastest person I clocked at about 11 seconds, okay? That was pretty easy for everyone, right? Did everybody write January, February, March, April, May, in that order? Yeah, okay. The reason that's easy for us is we have a pathway in our brain. We can go right to that little file in our long-term memory. We probably learned it as a kindergartner, maybe before, right? The months of the year, we learned it as January, February, March, April, and on down. I failed my own test. All right, so now this time when I say start, I want you to write the months of the year, but I want you to write them in alphabetical order. Ready? Go. Raise your hand when you're done. Okay, we have someone who's done. All right. So the fastest time that time was about 45 seconds, a little over 3 times as long, right? Not only did it take us 3 times as long, how many of you made a mistake along the way, had to scribble it out and start over? Yeah. Because we don't have a pathway, we don't have a file folder in our brain that we learned, hey, the months of the year in alphabetical order. So one thing about dementia is the file folders that they have, those little pathways, even for the most common everyday task, hey, change your clothes, their file folders are destroyed by the disease. They don't have those pathways. So even little simple tasks to them is like asking us to write the months in alphabetical order. We need to understand that it's going to take about 3 times as long, right? And we need to expect that they're going to make mistakes. Okay. So now we're going to kind of move in, switch gears a little bit, and talk about ways to more effectively communicate or have visitations with someone with dementia. And a lot of the material that I'm covering in this section comes from a book called Creating Moments of Joy. One of the sign-up sheets that we have in the back, there's a couple copies of the book there. I'm going to give one to the library here. But if you would like your own copy, you can put your name on that sign-up sheet and just indicate whether you prefer a new or a used copy. We will order them and it will be put on your bill. The used copies, about $8. The new copies are about $20. So just indicate which you prefer if you sign up for that book. So, yes. I'm not sure about. Okay, yeah, I would think so. I've just been ordering them off Amazon. So if you want to go on your own and order them off Amazon, feel free to do that too. But it is a book that I recommend. It's a very light, I don't want to say lighthearted, but it's an easy, light read, and it's all about just avoiding frustration, enjoying the moments that we have left with folks with dementia, and making those moments as quality as possible, kind of letting go of the stuff that doesn't matter. So some just general tips for communication with someone with dementia. Cut down on as many distractions as possible. Folks with dementia are not able to differentiate this conversation that's going on over here and the TV that's in the background. To them, it's all real and it's all aimed at them. To that note, this is a true story. Sometimes folks with dementia think that what's happening on the TV is really happening right now in real life. I had a resident years ago, not even an urban house, on a different hall, during the time that COVID was first coming around, and they had their TV on the news, and they became so scared they called 911. So that's real to them. Background distractions, the more we can cut out of that stuff is more helpful. Approaching someone from the front, not from the side or from the back. This helps us to get their attention and their focus, but also because of the way that vision is affected with dementia, they may not see you coming in the periphery. And then if you all of a sudden touch someone from the side or the back, you may startle them. If you startle them, you may not get a good reaction. You can hold out your hand if you're in front of someone, looking at them. Introduce yourself, use their name, hold out your hand. If they accept your hand, you know you have permission to be that close to them. If they do not accept your hand and you get those nonverbal cues that this isn't the right time, back away. They're not ready to have someone that close to them. Less words, so no lengthy explanations, simple statements as possible. Again, they're losing the ability to understand the spoken word. So the less words we can throw at them, the less confusion they're going to have, and therefore the less frustration. So instead of words, some things we can use are cues like pictures, acting out, or demonstration. Just an example, a lot of times I'll use this when I want folks to brush their teeth or take out the dentures. If I say, we're going to go in the bathroom, okay, now brush your teeth. They don't understand what I want them to do. If I hand them the toothbrush and say, they can still understand what I want them to do, even though they're not understanding the words that I'm saying. Same thing with dentures. A lot of times, I'll take that denture cup and put it up to them, and they'll spit them right out for me. Give one or two choices. So too many choices can be overwhelming. Making demands on someone can be overwhelming, asking them to do too much that they're just not able to do. And watch your nonverbal communication. So just because they don't understand the words that you're telling them doesn't mean that they don't pick up on your mood or the messages that you're sending them nonverbally. So a smile, hi, how are you, creates a whole different mood with someone with dementia as then busting in there. I have this task in mind that I have got to get done, and I'm going to get started right away. You're going to get very different reactions. Take that extra minute or two to form that connection with them before you start asking them to do things. Okay. So one thing that we need to understand to have successful interactions with people with dementia is to understand that we all have our own versions of reality, right? In my reality, the year is 2024. I'm a nurse here at Scotia. I have 2 kids. There's not a person in this room who's going to talk me out of my reality. And if you try to tell me those things are not true, I'm not going to trust you very much, and I'm probably going to want to get away from you. The same thing is true of folks with dementia. They have their own version of reality, okay? And we're not going to talk them out of their version of reality. So one thing we don't want to do is argue with them because it will not be fruitful. One thing that also happens as folks progress with dementia, they become younger in their minds. I'm not talking about the developmental age that they're out. I'm talking about they actually see themselves as younger versions of themselves. There's a lot of cues we can see that tell us this. So they may walk by a mirror and not recognize themselves. Who is that older person? Right? The 40-year-old son may show up to visit them and they don't recognize him because in their mind, their son is still a child. Or maybe they say that's my spouse because in their mind, they and their spouse are the ones who are middle-aged, not their children. And then as they get even older, a lot of times we start hearing about mom and dad. So we know that they're even further back in their minds. A lot of times I've heard folks talk about mom taking care of me, dad taking care of me. Other relatives will tell me, oh my gosh, I can't believe they remember that person. There was somebody in our childhood that was around. So they regress even further back in their childhood. So those are the types of realities that they might be living in their mind when they have dementia. And what we don't want to do is try to correct them or talk them out of it. So when we hear phrases a lot like, I want to go home, they might be talking about a home that they lived in 50 years ago. So it's not helpful to say, you are home, you live here now. We're not going to talk them into thinking that's correct. So we can try other things. And on one side of one of those handouts, there's a whole excerpt from the book that gives you some ideas about things you can say that are kinder than trying to argue or reorient them. You can say, well, let's have a cup of coffee first. I just put coffee on, right? Or, okay, but let's get dressed and ready first. If they say, I have to go to work, instead of saying, you don't work anymore, you're retired, you say, oh, your boss called, it's Saturday, you can sleep in today. We give them answers that make sense to them. We used to do something called reality orientation, which means that we would actually correct someone and say, no, you are home. No, the year is 2024. Well, we didn't get very good results because the thing is, you're not going to talk someone out of their reality, and it only creates frustration. The other thing is, they're never going to say to you, oh, yeah, that's right. You're right. I remember now. Because they can't. It's part of the disease. Their brain literally cannot remember. They don't have the ability to adjust their mindset like that. But the nice thing is, we do. Sometimes it takes a minute to find the right thing to say to the person with dementia. Again, we're trying to give them an answer that's going to give us a better reaction. It may not be perfect, but we're trying to get a better reaction. Sometimes it is guesswork for a while until we find the right thing. I used to have a resident who would repeatedly ask us, where am I? If you said Laurenburg, you were going to be cussed out every time, okay? Because that did not make sense to her. She didn't know why in the world she'd be in Laurenburg. If we said Lumberton, she'd say, oh, okay. That answer made sense to her. So how do we know we're saying the right thing? We let that person be our teacher. You'll look at their face, you'll know by their reaction whether you've given a good answer or not. And once we discover that, of course, we also let everyone know, hey, when she asks you, where am I? You need to say Lumberton, not Laurenburg. So if you are a caregiver of someone with dementia and you know the tips and tricks for how to have good interactions with them, please tell everyone you know, hey, this is what you need to say. All right, I'm going to read just a little exercise. It's just a mental exercise in your mind. That's from this book, Creating Moments of Joy. Okay. I want you to think of something from your childhood that makes you feel good just thinking about it. A wooden swing hanging from a tree, grandma baking bread in the kitchen, fresh strawberries picked from a garden, a new dress, or a baseball game with the neighborhood kids. Okay. Everybody thinking of something? Would you have thought of that memory right now had I not asked you to? Probably not. It takes someone or something else to trigger moments in our memory. The next question is, are you thinking about the whole day or are you thinking of just a moment? Just a moment. Our memory is made up of moments. People with dementia still have these moments in their memory just like you and I, but they can't pull them out of the darkness. Not until they see a swing, smell the bread, taste a strawberry, or feel a baseball glove with the memory will the memory be triggered. So with folks with dementia, we can still have these visits and pull these memories out of them, creating moments of joy. One thing we don't want to do is ask them to remember, because again, picture their brain. They have brain failure, they can't. But we can remember for them. So instead of saying, hey, your son came to visit you do you remember that your son came to visit you yesterday? They're going to say, no, my son hasn't been to see me in months. Instead, we can say things like, oh, your son looks just like you. You guys have the same beautiful blue eyes. Talk about something they love without putting that pressure on them to remember things. Again, I know I'm repeating this, but not arguing, not contradicting, and not reorienting them, okay? It's not about us being right. We, as people we love or take care of have dementia, we kind of need to give up the need to be right. Look at pictures or listen to music. If they're not able to have that conversation with you, one of the blessings of dementia is that music is stored in a little bit different place in our brain than just plain language. And we get to hold on to that a little bit longer. So if the person can no longer have a conversation, they could still enjoy listening to music with you. You'll be surprised at some folks who maybe can't get the words of a sentence together anymore, can hear a song and still sing all the words. The other tip I can give you is taking a deep breath and having patience. Sometimes you will hear the same question or the same phrase on repeat every 30 seconds. Remember, the person can't help it. They can't change that. The one thing we can change is our mindset and our reaction. So instead of saying, oh, why are they saying this again? They don't remember that they just told me 5 seconds ago? No, they don't, and we're not going to make them remember that. But what we can change is our mindset, and we can say, wow, I guess I need to remember this for them, because there'll come a day when they can't remember it anymore, and they won't be able to tell me. Just like with the visitation, the challenging behaviors, the one thing we have absolute control over is our own mindset and our own reaction. So the thought I always try to come in with is the person with dementia is having a hard time. It's not that they're trying to give us a hard time. There are a lot of things that can cause challenging behaviors, and there are a lot of challenging behaviors that can come up in dementia. So when this happens, we need to play detective. A behavior is a way that they are communicating an unmet need. So they no longer have the words to tell us what's wrong or ask us for what they need. They are telling us through a behavior in a different way. Lots of things, we need to become a detective and figure out what the trigger is. A good place to start is with your basic needs. So are they hot? Are they cold? Are they hungry? Are they thirsty? Are they in pain? This is a really big one, because we may be trying to change someone's shirt. They don't have the words to say, hey, don't pull on my shoulder. That's my bad shoulder, okay? What they still have in their brain is, you touch my bad shoulder, bam, I hit you to get you to go away. So it's about becoming a detective. Being overwhelmed, this is another huge one. Are they overstimulated? Too much noise can be very overstimulating. Asking them to do too much can be very overstimulating. Sometimes it's things about the person's history as well. If they've experienced trauma in their past, that may come back out as they have dementia. There was a story I heard about a man who was really triggered and would become very aggressive right around the holidays, whenever the Christmas music would come out and the Christmas decorations. And what they ended up learning about this man is that he was at Pearl Harbor when it was attacked. And if that, of course, was a very traumatic experience for him. And Pearl Harbor was attacked, I think, December 8th, 7th. Okay, thank you. December 7th, if you think about what was going on, what are our cues that alert us to that it's December time? It's the Christmas music, it's the decorations. So in his mind, that was all real again. When he heard that Christmas music, when he saw the Christmas decorations, that cued him to be back at Pearl Harbor, and he was traumatized. Same thing will come out if someone has been robbed at gunpoint or been in a scary situation like that. They can have flashbacks where that becomes very real to them again. So sometimes it's about knowing the person's history. And sometimes not only the trauma history, but their general history. If I have a resident that was a night shift nurse for 40 years, and all of a sudden I want her to go to bed at 7 p.m. and get up at 7 a.m., but whenever we go to get her out of bed, she's fighting against us, we're not going to get a good reaction, because that's not who she was. She's used to being up all night, right? So, like I said, we are the ones who can let go of the things that don't matter. They can't. A good rule of thumb is it hurting anyone? So if they're wearing 3 shirts, is it hurting anyone? If they're carrying around 6 magazines, is it hurting anyone? maybe those family members or caregivers, it pains you a little bit to see your loved one look like that, but it's not hurting them, and the reality is it's not hurting anyone, and if to get them to change that would cause distress, maybe it's something we can let go. There will be other things that you will have to pick your battles, so to speak, and fight. For example, if they're hoarding rotten food, that is something that could be hurting someone, and we're going to need to address that, right? Hopefully when they're not there, because folks with dementia, they don't want to see you. They still don't want to see you like any of us touching and taking their things. But silver lining, if you do it while they're gone, when they come back, they're probably not going to remember that it's gone. So in summary, join the person with dementia in their reality. We're not going to demand that they come to ours. We're going to give them answers that make sense to them. We're not going to argue. We're not going to contradict. If they become upset, we can walk away if we need to. We can return in 5 minutes for a fresh start. Again, just bounce back in with that big smile as if this is the first time all week you've seen them. Nothing lasts, the good or the bad. Don't make demands on them. Don't ask them to remember. Remember for them. They don't have the capacity to change or adjust their mindset or let go of those things, but we do. If you know one person with dementia, you know one person. There's different types of dementia. Every person is different. And even for those with dementia, sometimes every day is different. Okay, so that is all the talking I have for you. But we do have, I wanted to explain a couple of the sign-up sheets in the back, and then we have a special treat that I'm going to introduce to you that is going to talk for just a couple minutes as well. So there are 3 sign-up sheets in the back. One is if you're interested in possibly volunteering with some of the dementia residents we have here in Skilled, there's a little list at the top. It's not all-inclusive of ideas that we might could use volunteers for. So if you're interested in getting more information about volunteering, that's one sign-up sheet. The sign-up sheet for getting the book, Creating Moments of Joy, that's the middle sign-up sheet. And then on the other side, one thing that there's been some interest, and we would definitely be interested in getting going here at Scotia, is a dementia support group for caregivers and loved ones. So if that's something you're interested in getting more information about, there's a 3rd sign-up sheet for that. And now I want to introduce you guys to Tiffany Wright. Tiffany is an occupational therapy student here at Scotia Village, but she's been an occupational therapy assistant for 12 years, so she has lots of professional knowledge, and she has the unique experience of being a caregiver of her mom for the last 10 years. Her mom has frontotemporal dementia, and Tiffany has been one of her primary caregivers, so she has that nice personal experience, and she is going to speak on the caregiver's experience a little bit for you. So thank you.
Well, good morning. Thank you, Susan, for having me today. As she mentioned, not only, I guess over the last 12 years, she just wanted me to share a little bit with you guys, just from not only my professional experience as a caregiver, as an occupational therapy assistant, but also as a personal caregiver. So over the past 12 years, it has been quite the journey, not only professionally, but about 10 years ago, my mom, we started this process of getting her diagnosed, and she has the type of dementia called frontotemporal dementia. So as you may probably notice, I'm a very young caregiver, and that's because that type of dementia primarily affects people between, or primarily is diagnosed between the ages of 40 and 60. But there have been people who have been diagnosed as early as in their 20s and 30s, unfortunately. And it is about 10 to 15% of cases of dementia, and you probably have seen it a little bit more recently on the TV. Bruce Willis and what's the other lady's name? From The View, maybe? What's her name? have recently, well, I forget her name, but they've both been recently diagnosed with FTD, which is the same type of dementia, and it affects people at younger ages. But so I've been through the journey over the past 12 years, not only professionally, but personally. So I've worn different hats. And I'm a firm believer that God leads you right where you need to be. And today I feel that is right here. And everywhere that I am, that's how I feel, because not only have I had the professional experience, but being able to navigate through my mama's journey of having dementia has just given me a whole nother insight to caregivers and those people living with dementia and what they experience, because that is very different and very unique than just specifically in the professional world. Unfortunately, living with dementia and caregiving for a person living with dementia is very challenging. There's no arguing with that. You will all face different challenges, and whether you are a caregiver today, whether you'll become a caregiver one day, or if you're a neighbor, a friend, or a family member that can provide support for a person, I feel like things like today are really, really helpful to be able to gain the knowledge that, like Susan shared, to know how you can better provide care for your loved one or support someone who is providing care for their loved one. So some of the challenges that I've faced as a personal caregiver and that others may also face is, number one, getting a diagnosis. As Susan mentioned in her talk, knowing what type of dementia really helps to understand what's to come, what to kind of expect, maybe what the life expectancy is, and those kinds of things, because each type presents different challenges. But that can take some time. So fortunately for us, it only took us about a year and a half, but others can take 3 to 5 years to even get a diagnosis after they're noticing those first signs. Hopefully over time, as you know, the healthcare field gets better and better about being able to pick up on that earlier, hopefully that will become less of a challenge. But right now it has been a challenge for a lot of people and caregivers. The other part is just understanding the disease process, what to expect and how can I help my loved one. And again, things like coming to seminars like today that Susan had, she gave great tips about how we can help our loved ones. And not only that, but if you're visiting someone who has dementia, what are some things you can do or make sure you avoid? So becoming more knowledgeable obviously is extremely helpful in terms of facing that challenge. Financially, having a diagnosis of dementia is going to cause a burden, one way or another. You may need extra equipment, you may need to pay sitters. It may be that my mom, for example, she was only 50 years old when she was diagnosed, and so she was still working. But she suddenly had to stop working, so she wasn't quite prepared yet to not be able to work again. So obviously it can cause financial burdens. In all types of dementia, you'll experience different types of behaviors, whether that means it's personality changes, whether that means it's language difficulties and not being able to communicate with your loved one. One way or another, you will have some challenges in trying to navigate how to manage those behaviors. So that's always a challenge. In our journey right now, FTD, the typical lifespan is only 7 to 8 years after diagnosis. My mama has been living now for 10 years, so we are nearing the end of our journey. And that looks different than it did in the beginning. That looks different than it did in the middle. We have had different challenges along the way, and it is a great, I guess, picture of knowing that it is definitely a roller coaster, having those highs and lows and highs and lows, but how important it is, especially for a caregiver or a family member, to really just latch on and hold on to those positive moments, because they get more far and few in between, and that can really just be draining and exhausting as a caregiver. Over the past several years, I have joked, but it has been the truth, that I come to work for a break. When other people leave work a lot of times and go home for a break, I actually come to work for a break. So that is definitely unique, than most people. I guess the other part is just to sum it up in terms of the challenges. Navigating the journey is tough. One day, one challenge may present itself, the next week it may be something totally different. There are definitely so many things that you'll face. And one thing that is really difficult a lot of times, especially as being adults and being independent, is really recognizing that we need help. I know for me that has always been hard to ask for help, but in order for us to not only care for our loved one, we have to care for ourselves, and so therefore we do need support, and that's okay. I know Susan mentioned that in her talk, and that's always a good reminder, especially as a caregiver, that it's okay to need support. And so some of the things that she mentioned that y'all have an opportunity to do at the back of the room today have been supports that have been helpful for me throughout my journey as a personal caregiver. And one of the big things has been support groups. Some people shy away and they're like, oh, I don't need that. But I'm telling you, support groups are really, 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 really helpful because dementia and being a caregiver in general can be very isolating. Over time, you start to notice family members, friends, and things like that, they stop coming by, they stop visiting, they stop calling, and so they don't realize they're doing that, but it does happen, and I have heard that at probably 9 out of 10 other caregivers that I know, no matter how old you are, young or older, it doesn't matter. People can, I guess, be hesitant because they don't want to cause any issues or whatever, if they come for a visit or whatnot, but they don't realize that we still need that as caregivers. So being able to go to a support group allows you to connect with people, number one, but also people who understand the unique position that you're in. So before COVID, because you know COVID changed everything, because FTD is so rare and a lot of times caregivers are younger, so that is a little bit more of a unique situation. I drove to Raleigh once every month or every 2 weeks, I can't remember which one it was. So it was an hour and a half drive for me one way for an hour support group, but it was absolutely worth the time for me to sit with other caregivers who understood the challenges that I was facing. Some of those caregivers were what I would call a few steps ahead of me, so they had already been through those challenges and they could help me to know how to best navigate, and others that were kind of behind me and I could also encourage. So support groups are really helpful. Even if you're not living with the person, that's fine. Even if you're providing support for, say, your neighbor, a friend, or family, and it's an ongoing support that you're providing for them, it is still helpful to be in a support group. Other things are events and seminars. There are different nonprofits throughout not only the state but also the nation that hold different educational seminars similar to today to help you just really understand not only the disease better, but also some tools and tips and tricks on how to care for someone. And then there are financial support resources out there that can help with sitters and things like that. Books have been a huge support for me. I have not read the book that Susan mentioned, but I plan to. But there's other books that have been out there that have just not only helped with understanding, but also being helpful in terms of the emotional and mental part of providing care. Different services like grocery delivery, because as dementia progresses, it's harder to get in the car and get out of the car. So being able to have those types of services are really helpful. So basically, just to sum it up, one of the things that a neurologist mentioned to me, and I have not forgotten it since that day, which was very early on, is as you're navigating the journey, just think about their safety, and not just their safety, but your sanity as a caregiver, because they cannot be cared for at home or whatever without you. So you are still an important part of their care. So your sanity and your health are also very important. So whenever that becomes an issue, we have to look out and say, okay, what do I need to do now? Do I need additional support, or do I need to look at what's next? Do we need to make a move? Do I need to hire sitters? So just always keep that in mind, because that's okay, and that will happen throughout the journey. We have to keep asking ourselves those questions. So I guess I just want to encourage you that if you're a caregiver for someone with dementia or if you become one, look at all your support systems and definitely get the support. If you're a neighbor or a friend and you know someone who has dementia or caring for someone with dementia, definitely ask how you can help and how you can provide support, because sometimes the caregivers might not know how in the moment, but any little bit of help definitely helps relieve the burden, because living with dementia and caring for people with dementia is definitely challenging. So thank you so much for letting me be here today and share a little bit of my story, and I wish you all the best.
Questions?
Absolutely.
I have a question. Is there a legacy component to the disease? Should my daughter worry about the fact that her mother had dementia?
Yes, there are genes. Sorry? Oh, he asked if there was a legacy component. So is dementia passed on genetically, basically? Should his daughter worry about the disease? So the answer is yes and no. There are genes that they know that cause you more likely to have the disease. And of course, like Tiffany mentioned, there's different types of dementia, so the answer is a little bit different for different types. But overall, there are genes that they know that give you an increased risk. But sometimes people without those genes still get the dementia, or those people with the genes may not get the dementia. It's not a 100% correlation, but you can have genetic testing done. There are a few types of dementia, like Huntington's, things. There's more definitive genetic testing for those things. Yes.
Medication, is there much medication available, and does it delay or make the journey easier?
So there are two medications basically that are used specifically for the dementia, and that's Namenda and Aricept. There's no cure for dementia. They don't usually improve upon symptoms that somebody, they don't make them go backwards, back up the hill, so to speak. What they can do is delay a decline. So they can hold off progression of the disease a little bit more. And then a lot of medications are used in dementia to treat some of those symptoms that we see come up. So you may see someone with dementia get started on things for anxiety if they're very anxious, antipsychotics if they're having a lot of hallucinations that are distressing them, medications for sleep if they stop sleeping, things like that. Yes, ma'am.
Difference again, dementia and Alzheimer's.
So dementia is an umbrella term for the symptoms of memory loss that someone has. There are many diseases that cause dementia. Alzheimer's is one of those diseases that causes dementia. So you can have dementia, but not Alzheimer's.
Does dementia usually go into Alzheimer's?
So Alzheimer's is one disease that can cause dementia, but you can have a different disease that's causing dementia. That is nothing to do with Alzheimer's. Does that make sense? Okay.
One of my other questions, in dealing with a person with dementia, your behavior, should it be happy, sad, or to help them the best? Should you be happy or should you be sad?
I think we always want to go in with a positive approach. My experience, a smile, they're going to feed a little bit off of our mood and those nonverbal cues, especially as they don't understand as much what we're saying. They still recognize that we're smiling and we're positive, and they pick up on that. On the other hand, if you have someone, especially in early dementia, who's processing really difficult feelings, we don't want to minimize those feelings. It's okay for them to be angry or sad about the situation. So you can be, supportive of that. But I think in general,
With their appetites?
and I think I forgot to mention this. So one of the things with dementia, as the brain fails, one of the things they ultimately lose the ability to do is to chew and swallow safely. The brain can no longer send that message. And then eventually the brain also stops sending the message that, hey, you're hungry and thirsty, and they stop eating altogether. So weight loss in dementia, especially in the later stages, is almost inevitable. With their appetites, well, we can do things like supplements, Ensure, Boost, try to get extra calories in them that way. There's a couple of medications that have some effect on stimulating appetite. But in the end, I think we come to the acceptance that this is a part of the disease process. It's a fatal disease. This is the end stage of the disease process. They will stop eating and drinking. And when they get to that point, we have to really think about our goals. And if we're just forcing someone to eat and drink and it's not what their body is wanting at that moment, that's us hanging on at that point, not them. So, any other questions? Okay, thank you guys so much.